Verity, La Sombra de un Engaño by Colleen Hoover. Lately, it's not my typical genre, but it is my typical genre, if you know what I mean. I will say the vibe and the undertones of this book are good. If you like a book just for that, this undertone of creepiness, right? And then also this undertone, there's this chemistry and this tension between Lowen and Jeremy. Read the book just for all of that. Let's see, overall impression, I liked this book. Probably the reason I didn't love it is because I listened on audio, and I usually enjoy a book more when I actually read it. Some of the stuff was a bit unbelievable, but that's typical in a book. I didn't like the ending, but after the fact, okay, once you figure out what's going on, then I was like, oh, I didn't like it. But like, okay, it makes more sense. I like it more after I think about it, but once I first figured out what was going on, I was like, Synopsis. Lowen, not a very successful author, is hired to finish some work that Verity, an outrageously best-selling author, didn't finish. Verity is in a coma after a series of tragedy that her family experiences. Each of her twin daughters dies in separate incidents, and then Verity crashes her car into a tree. That leaves Jeremy raising their son by himself while caring for Verity. Verity is now, she's not in a coma, she's in a mental state where she is maybe aware of what's going on, but they're not sure. She has very basic functions, but she doesn't speak, she doesn't interact, and they don't think that she's going to recover from it. There is chemistry between Lowen and Jeremy, and Lowen is determined to be respectful and keep things professional. She finds an autobiography written by Verity with some disturbing information in it, and then things start happening around the house. That's all I'll say in the synopsis. Positives, I like the plot and characters. I like the relationship between Verity and her husband, how it started, their first date, which you read in the diary. I like the undercurrents in the book, the mystery and the situation between Lowen and Jeremy. Very well written, creepy, enthralling. It's enthralling. The negatives. The narrator is a tiny bit monotone, but that's not a negative, because if she were super theatrical, that would annoy me as well. The narrator said Crew. The little boy's name is Crew, and I thought she was saying Creo. It's not a negative in the book. It's just something that was a negative for me. I wish there was less stuff about the kids, but that's a major part of the plot. The way it all turned out, I was like, but then once I was thinking about it, then I was like, okay, I like it a little bit better. I usually don't like audiobooks, and I wrote a little bit about why I don't usually like audiobooks. However, let's see, side note. Okay, so spoilers. A traumatic incident happens in the beginning of the book, and then you're left thinking, like, why did this happen? How does this factor into the book? Does this factor in later? But I think it just makes her trust and feel safe with Jeremy. It's just this random thing that happened, and Jeremy is the one who is hiring her to finish his wife's books, and she just had this super weird encounter, which he helps her, right? So you're like, well, this is weird. Did one of them set this up? No, actually, in my opinion, but it makes her feel, and it adds to the creepiness of the book. And then she's going to finish Verity's books, right? And then she sees Verity. She finds on Verity's computer an autobiography, and Verity says, most people shouldn't write an autobiography because you have to let down your guard, and you have to be brutally honest, and most people cannot do that. She said, what I'm going to do is be brutally honest. And she does, apparently. I like the first date between between Verity and Jeremy. That was fun. And by the way, Jeremy is like this super charismatic guy the whole time. So you're like, you just know that you're like, I know I'm gonna roll my eyes when it turns out he's a psycho, because you're gonna be like, of course, he's this perfect husband who turns out to be not perfect. But then Verity starts to say that she's jealous of her unborn twin daughters. And you're like, oh. And she tries to abort them. And she just has no maternal instinct toward them. She loves Jeremy. And so much so that she doesn't want the love Jeremy has for their daughters to be stronger than the love he has for her. And that part of the book was like, I didn't like it. But I think it is a very human thing to be maybe jealous of your kids, or worried about, does my husband love my daughter more than me? I mean, I don't have any kids, and I feel like if I were a mom, I would want my husband to love my kids. I want my daughter, when I have children, my son or my daughters need for a father is more important to me than my own. You know what I mean? I feel like when I'm a parent, I will be selfless in a lot of ways. I feel like when I'm a parent, I'm not going to be jealous of my daughter. I want my husband to love my daughters. I want my husband to love my son. But this is Verity. And I think it also is probably a very normal thing that parents get kind of insecure when the parent loves the kid and you're like, oh, what about me? I think that's a very normal thing. But Verity takes it to a different level. I didn't like that stuff so much, but you have this situation where Lowen is reading this stuff in this diary and she's like, oh my goodness. And she has these feelings for Jeremy and she's like, no, I'm going to keep it professional. They do not keep it professional. They do not. But then, oh my goodness, but then I swear I've read stuff like this before. I've read a book like this before, I swear. Because then she's in the room and she likes Jeremy, Verity's husband, and she's reading Verity's book, so she knows Verity is a psycho. You know, she knows Verity has these dark secrets. And Verity, like, looks at her. Verity's, like, almost in a coma, right? They don't know her mental state. And she usually has her eyes closed, and then she's, like, in the room, and Verity's just locked eyes with her. Oh, my goodness. The little boy has a knife in one scene, and then she goes to get it, and the knife is gone. The only other person in the room is Verity. The TV's on, and then she walks by, and the TV's off. The only person in the room is Verity. She's outside, and she thinks she sees Verity in the window looking at her and Jeremy. But Verity's supposed to be bedridden and can't move. Oh, it's like, but those vibes, and then Lowen herself, she just has this traumatic incident, and also her mother has passed away, and she has a history of sleepwalking. So you're wondering about Lowen. You feel like Lowen is a pretty stable person, but then you're like, okay, is she imagining it, especially under these circumstances? And then the way it ends, you're like, she finds this letter. Okay, the way it happens is so, like, stupid. She puts a baby monitor in there to see Verity. When she sees Verity crawling, she's like, Jeremy, she murdered your daughters and blah, blah, blah. I don't know, whatever. She, like, told Jeremy. Jeremy goes and strangles her to death. And then you're like, what in the world? And then she finds a letter saying that Verity actually, she's like, I did an exercise where I pretended I was the villain in my life, and I'm really not. And then Lowen's like, did we just murder an innocent woman? And you're like, by this time as the reader, you're like, this whole thing is stupid anyway. But then to think about it, it's interesting because Jeremy already found this autobiography, and then so he thinks that Verity is like this malicious person, but she's not. So he kills her. He actually goes and strangles her and pretends like she crashed her car into a tree, right? But then he's like, well, I don't want to take my son's mother away. She can't hurt him. She is awake in the hospital. She's not in a coma. She's not in a weird mental state the whole time. But she has to pretend because she's afraid that Jeremy will kill her. And she's so afraid that she has to make sure, like she opens a bank account when nobody's home, and she has to make sure that she's away from the house when Jeremy finds out the truth, because she's afraid that if she wakes up to even try to tell him, that he will murder her. And you're like, okay, maybe, but then no. And then after the fact, you're like, okay, well, but did she lie about the whole, but then is the lie that she pretended that she was playing the villain, but that really was her real raw autobiography. And then you're like, but if Jeremy already read it, is he ever going to tell Lowen he read it and murdered her in the first place? Murdered her, tried to. But then he did murder her. I mean, it's ridiculous. But some of it's good, and it's enthralling. If you can like a book, I like it even though the ending is like, I was like, okay, that is crazy. That's whack. But it's enthralling, and the whole mystery of it and the vibe and the undercurrents, very good. I recommend it, but it's my typical genre, like I said, but lately not my typical genre, but it is my typical genre. They're making a movie out of it. Read it if you want to.